Points of discussion. Topics to be covered. Ethnocentrism, functions of ethnocentrism, cultural relativism, xenocentrism and xenophobia, and culture as heritage.
First, we're going to tackle about ethnocentrism. The word ethno comes from the Greeks and it refers to a people, nation, or cultural groupings. Centric, on the other hand, comes from Latin and refers to the center. The term ethnocentrism then refers to the tendency of each society to place its own cultural patterns at the center of things. Ethnocentrism is the practice of comparing other cultural practices with those of one's own and automatically finding those other cultural practices to be. So sa madaling salita po, ito yung kilos ng pagsusuri ng iba pang mga kultura ayon sa perception nila na nagmula sa mga pamantayan at kaugalian ng sarili nilang kultura. According to William Graham Summer, ethnocentrism is the belief that your native culture is the natural and superior way of understanding the world. This leads to making incorrect assumptions about other behavior based on your own norms, values, and beliefs. For instance, anytime you think of another culture's traditional food as weird as gross, that's product of ethnocentrism. So, it describes the term involves a belief or attitude that one's own culture is better than all others. So, yung example po dito is yung Asian cultures. Di ba po gumagamit sila ng mga chopstick sa pagkain nila? Yung mga Amerika naman po ay gumagamit ng fork, spoon, and knives. Samantalang tayong mga Pilipino, nasanay tayong gumamit ng fork, spoons, and nagkakamay tayo dahil yun yung mga nakasanayan natin na itinuro ng mga ninuno natin. Functions of ethnocentrism. The function of ethnocentrism in maintaining order are more apparent than those which promote social change. First, we have encouraged the solidarity of a group. Second, we have hinders the understanding or the cooperation between groups. And the third is conflict, of course, often leads to social change.
When do we become ethnocentric and what is our way out? Number 1. When you judge the behavior and beliefs of people who are different from you. Way out. To stop this ethnocentric behavior, dapat hindi muna agad-agad tayo nanguhusga ng ibang tao porket naiiba lang sila. Number 2. When you believe that they are primitive cultures, especially if the way of life is different from yours. And number 2, hindi lahat tayo pantay-pantay. Merong kultura na meron tayo pero wala sa kanila. At meron din kultura na meron sila na wala sa atin. May kulturang higit na mataas at may kulturang mas mababa. And number 3, when you believe that some cultures are backward if they lack the technology and consumerism of your own culture. Way out. Lahat tayo ay may kanya-kanyang kultura and may kanya-kanya tayong paraan kung paano natin matutugunan ang ating mga pangangailangan.
Cultural relativism is the idea that all norms, beliefs, and values are dependent on the cultural context and should be treated as such. A key component of cultural relativism is the concept that nobody, not even researchers, comes from neutral position. The way to deal with our own assumptions is not to pretend that they don't exist, but rather to acknowledge them and then use the awareness that we are not neutral to inform our conclusions. It says that cultural relativism refers to not judging a culture to our own standards of what is right or wrong, strange or normal. For example, instead of thinking fried crickets are disgusting, one should instead ask, why do some cultures eat fried insects? So makikita natin dito na sa Mexico po ay nagluluto sila ng piniritong cricket or tipaklong dahil ito ay puno ng protina. So, sikat na sikat daw to na lutuin na pangrehiyon ng Osaka at kinain ng libu-libong taon na bilang isang malusog na mapagkukunan ng pagkain. So, ayun po yung kanilang beliefs na yung tipaklong ay punong-puno ng protein. Kaya, ginagawa nila tong fried crickets. So, kaya dapat huwag po tayong mag-judge kung ano yung nakikita natin. Instead, alamin muna natin kung ano ba or bakit nila niluluto yung mga ganun pagkain. Okay?
Cultural relativism is also a research method. Social scientists strive to treat cultural differences as neither inferior nor superior. The way they can understand the research topics within the appropriate cultural context and examine their own biases and assumptions at the same time. To avoid judging the cultural practices of groups that are different to yours, we can use the cultural relativism approach. Cultural relativism refers to not judging a culture to our own standards of what is right or wrong, strange or normal. Instead, we should try to understand cultural practices of other groups in its own cultural context. Cultural relativism is the ability to understand a culture on its terms and not to make judgments using the standards of one's own culture. The goal of this is to promote understanding of cultural practices that are not typically part of one's own culture. Using the perspective of cultural relativism leads to the view that no one culture is superior than other culture when compared to systems. There are two different categories of cultural relativism. One is absolute, meaning everything that happens within a culture must and should not be questioned by outsiders. And the last one is critical, creates questions about cultural practices in terms of who is accepting them and why. Critical cultural relativism also recognizes power relationships.
Ethnocentrism refers to a preference for the foreign. In this sense, it is the exact opposite of ethnocentrism. It is characterized by a strong belief that one's own products, styles, or ideas are inferior to those which originate elsewhere. Ethnocentrism is the exact opposite of ethnocentrism. So, yung ethnocentrism po kasi, ito po yung kaugaliang tumingin sa mundo lalo na mula sa pananaw ng sariling tradisyonal, ipinagpaliban o pinagpatibay ng kulturang etniko, habang ang ethnocentrism naman po ay isang kagustuhan para sa mga produkto, estilo o ideya ng ibang kultura. So, ang example po dito is the belief that other countries produce better children toys. Alam naman po natin na sa ibang bansa ay the best talaga yung gawaan ng kanilang laruan. Sobrang perfect, matibay. So, dito naman po sa atin, syempre, hindi naman po natin maitatanggi na alam naman po natin na pagkabili pa lang natin, medyo may sira na mga ganung bagay. So, yun yung po yung sinasabi sa ethnocentrism na kagustuhan sa produkto o estilo. No, kaya tayo talagang bumibili tayo ng the best product, yung alam nating matibay na ginagawa ng ibang country. So, yun po yung ethnocentrism.
Xenophobia, on the other hand, is the fear of what is perceived as foreign or strange. Xenophobia can be seen in the relations and perceptions of an in-group toward an out-group. It may include fear of losing identity. To summarize, xenophobia is strong and unreasonable dislike or fear of people from other countries. Xenophobia can be expressed in different ways. For example, feeling uncomfortable around people who fall into a different group and refusing to be friends with people due to their skin color.
Last po is cultural heritage. The heritage doesn't consist of money or property but of cultures, values, and tradition. So most important, it is the range of contemporary activities, meanings, and behaviors that we draw from them. Heritage includes but is much more than preserving, excavating, displaying, or restoring a collection of all things. So, cultural heritage implies a shared bond, our belonging to our community. It represents our history and our identity, our bond to past, to our present, and the future. The example of these are Puerto Princesa, Rice Terraces, historic city of Bigan, Church of Agustin. So, yung mga things naman po na sinaunang mga kagamitan, makikita po natin to sa mga museo, katulad ng mga sa Intramuros, mga ganun. So, yung the typical heritage artifacts are sites and objects, national flags. So, yung kung ano po yung matawat natin dito sa Pilipinas.